So you're dealing with more than one problem from a meth lab, more than just the drugs. So the FBI, we work with them on a daily basis. If we're going to go do an undercover buy to get into somebody that we think is also operating the lab, if it's a higher up middle level dealer up the ladder, we don't always have all the funds. We can go over there and maybe on a single buy drop thousands of dollars, and they help with that funding. We'll throw in some, they'll throw in a big chunk. Also the manpower of their task force people. They have people from Evansville, Vanderburgh, state police assigned as task force officers on that federal task force. So that's basically how we operate, and the resources that Prosecutor Clowers was talking about earlier, so we can go after these other dealers. And this is what's starting to turn it around. Since 2010, we did 80 labs in 2010, 80 meth labs. In 2011, by December of 2011, January 1 to December 31st, that dropped down to 37. Keep in mind, we did a drug raid that year too, and took off quite a few people. Between just the last two major operations, we've taken nearly 60 people off. That's just from those operations. We still do daily undercover buys. We may go ahead and take them down right then. Investigate the regular meth labs, arrest those people. The special operations that we give names are lengthy undercover operations. Then in 2012, that ended here in December, it was down to 24 labs for the year. So it's making an impact by double-pronging the proactive approach, having the resources that the prosecutor's office has gave my unit and the sheriff's department, help from the other agencies, Mount Vernon City Police. I said earlier, we were in constant contact with Officer Champlin, gather intel, we review that intel, we need to start a file and start investigating this group or that person. As you know, local pharmacy, those you live here at North End of County, was burglarized. That was all drug related. So this is the operation that we basically run at this time.
I'm gonna start passing around something, and answer this for me real quick, or for the group. When you go into a house and there's a meth lab, what type of things do you put on to go in and collect all the materials and do what you have to do?
Well, we kind of wear two hats. Depending how, once again, based on intelligence, our best, we can have all the weapons in the world, but the best element is the element of surprise. So we kind of wear two hats. You've seen the officers on TV and all the black gear and the helmets and the assault rifles and things like that. That's how the entry is normally made into a known meth lab. We know they got weapons in there. Sometimes we almost know when they last flushed their toilet. We know where the weapons are sitting. So we kind of pride ourselves on having that good of intel. Once the building has been cleared and all weapons are secured and children also removed, then we have to suit up. We have a chemical suit, chemical boots, SCBA, the air tanks that the firemen wear, we wear the same thing. We wear the chemical white suits. We're all sealed off. Those are special suits, sealed seams, and we will process the lab. Whatever we find out, bring the chemicals out, separate them out by the type of chemical they are so they don't get mixed with others and react and cause an explosion. If there's explosive, and we've had them booby-trapped before. One house on West 3rd Street, there was 4 places in the ceiling throughout the house that had been booby-trapped. We had to call the state police and Evansville Police Department bomb disposal team in to process the explosive booby traps before we processed the lab. Once we get that done, we've got everything out, photographed, everything out, sitting outside in the evidence collection area, and we're documenting it, re-photographing it. Sometimes we'll videotape the scene. Then we'll start our paper trail. We call the state police in after that, after we've dismantled the lab. That has to be properly disposed of, the chemicals, so they will send a team to take the chemicals off our hand because they have an explosion bunker and then they're contracted out to civilian companies to properly dilute the chemicals and get rid of them. We post that orange notice that the prosecutor talks about, and then we send the next day, within 24 hours, we'll send an occurrence report, and I believe you might have that there, to the health officer. And from there, he has control of the cleanup to the land.
So that's the point, yes.
The constituent components are potentially explosive. Is there a danger to the officers that are making this fuss, that they could just discharge a weapon could cause an explosion, or is it?
The lab itself is dangerous. If two of the wrong chemicals touch each other, the lithium metal strip that comes out of the batteries that the prosecutor was talking about, the torn open battery casings, that's water reactive, lithium is. If you have enough of it and it gets, if you're sweating and it drips onto that metal, or if it's raining outside and you don't have the collection area with a tin over it, or what have you, it gets wet, it can explode like a hand grenade. Now, if it's in a glass jar, it's basically a grenade. Of course, some chemicals will just cause an explosion fire. We've had them blow up on us before. We have an ambulance and fire department on any major lab response at the same time. Firemen are suited up, ready to drag our old carcasses out. As far as it is dangerous, that's just what we sign up for.
Yes, ma'am.
What if you've got 6 or 8 apartments all together? There's either, well, a meth lab, let's go there first. Or either, and I know if I suspect something, I would call. But
Right.
if it's a meth lab, what do I do with the other tenants?
We will evacuate them upon our arrival before we process that lab. We may do initial entry and do what we call a cursory search or check when we're clearing it for suspects and children and weapons. And if we, during that cursory search, we see what we feel is the meth lab and confirm it's there, we're going to evacuate we've done that several times in Mount Vernon and the bigger apartment complexes. We'll evacuate complete buildings with the help of fire department and other uniformed officers before we process that lab.
But who's responsible for, if those people have to stay out for several days, who's responsible?
Well, it's just like, almost like a natural disaster. We will contact the Red Cross if we have to, for them to have a facility set up somewhere. If we have to evacuate that much of an apartment complex, several buildings. A lot of times, you know, while we're doing our part dealing with the lab, the main threat, there'll be other officers out there. You know, do you have relatives come get you that you can go to for the night or what have you? If not, we'll call the Red Cross to help.
A lot of times, they're not going to be displaced very long. So you go in, you assess the meth lab, you get everybody out initially, you go in with the suits, you clean it up. It's generally not, and you tell me if I'm wrong here, if you've seen in your experience differently, but generally you're not going to contaminate all the other rooms, okay? So they're not going to be displaced. They're going to be able to come back either later that night or the very next day. The damage and the cleanup is usually contained in that one room. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, we'll sit there and remove the threat of the physical threat of the lab, such as the possibility of explosion or fire or what have you. That's why we call all these the ambulance and the fire trucks to the scene. And we're going to remove that threat out of that building. What's left, if anything, is contamination, depending on how many times or how long they've cooked there. And as the prosecutor said, when the lab is gone that we've taken out, all you have is maybe contamination to that apartment. They're probably going to be able to come back in, tenants to their apartments. But we mainly have to evacuate them out during the physical part of the lab that we're removing. We actually take the threat out the lab. Then we have the Indiana State Police. Once we're done dismantling the lab, they have basically a bomb bunker, and they're contracted out to civilian companies after they take the hazardous chemicals off our hands, and where we have an HARP, EPIC reports we have to fill out. It takes about a week to do the paperwork on a meth lab on our end. But they'll take that to that bunker that's certified to hold those type chemicals or explosive materials. And then they were contracted out to have it properly deactivated, for the sake of a better word at that point. And what, as far as
Guns.
money or guns,
Yeah.
you can run with that.
Well, a lot of times we try to take that money if we can, seize that money, maybe get it in a plea agreement or something like that, destroy the guns, and use that money to then go back out and buy drugs from other suspects. So a lot of times we're able to use this money for cleanup costs, to buy other supplies that we need, because there's a lot of supplies that go with the
Perishable supplies.
dismantling of a meth lab. And we use that to further our operation. There've
I've
been
taken
many
the guns
times.
down to J&J's and had them cut them up on the spot.
We try to destroy most of those guns that we can.
Do you make that decision?
Generally. A lot of times it's something that's worked out in a plea agreement. Other times if it goes to trial and they're found guilty, then the judge will make that decision. If they're found not guilty, hopefully not, but if they're found not guilty, then a lot of the things will be returned to them that are not illegal. When I look at a case, I try to look at someone's background, and I try to look and see if they are someone who's been involved in this before, someone who's had opportunities and has not taken advantage of them. There are lots of programs that if people want to take advantage of and get treatment, get help, addiction programs that they can go through, and receive that help and get away from this lifestyle, but so many folks just don't take advantage of it. And so we see them time and time again. So a lot of times, I think there was a case out of Superior Court recently where a man was sentenced to 32 years for a pretty serious or a pretty large meth lab, and his criminal history was very bad, and it did match. Okay, I see what you're saying. Well, it affects people a lot of different ways. Some people can become very violent. Some people will just hole up in their apartment and never come out. It just depends. But some of the residual effects is other crimes. You have people breaking in to obtain Sudafed pills, to cook more meth, or other things of that nature. I don't know the rate of recidivism, and that's a study. That is who is a repeat offender, who is prosecuted for this type of crime, and they commit it again. Now, what I would say is that it's a small group of people who are committing the crimes in our county. And that's my personal opinion, and just based on the experience that I have. 95% of the folks are not out committing crimes, but you got a pretty small portion of folks who this is their lifestyle. This is what they do. Some of them go off to prison and come back and they're doing the same thing again. Some of them are on probation and going through counseling and going through group sessions to break addiction, and yet they still fall right back into these traps and commit another crime. That's recidivism when that's happening. But I don't know what the specific rates are. Do you know, Judge? If you know,
Posey County is actually pretty low.
we have a pretty low recidivism rate. That's good. That's good.
The thing you have to remember with methamphetamine, it's a total different monster than anything else we've ever dealt with. It's different than the cocaine or your small-time burglar. With methamphetamine, over the years, we've got grandfather was a manufacturer. His son was a manufacturer. His son's son was a manufacturer. Third-generation manufacturers. And they just pass it down through the family like it was an heirloom or something. So we've actually had grandfather down to grandson, and in between that we've arrested for manufacturing meth.
Sounds more like moonshining.
Kind of along the same lines.
I wish it was moonshining instead of meth.
It seems